And with the Israel-Hamas war making headlines around the world, the spotlight is also on the United States for its transactions with Iran. Two transactions of $6 billion and $43 million from the US to Iran, casting aspersions on the timing of Hamas's attack on Israel. Let's break it down for you. In August, 5 US citizens detained by Tehran were allowed to leave the country. The US citizens were freed in exchange for the transfer of $6 billion frozen in South Korea. And at the same time, 5 Iranians held in the US were allowed to leave. The $6 billion were frozen in South Korean banks when President Donald Trump placed a total ban on Iran's oil exports and sanctioned its banking sector in 2019. These Iranian oil revenues were blocked in Seoul. And in a television interview, Iranian President Ibrahim Raisi also said that Iran would use the money wherever they needed it. And the Republican Party was quick to react to the situation. The presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy took to social media platform X to say that the $6 billion transfer worsened the situation. But the US State Department spokesperson immediately clarified that the prison transfer with Iran had nothing to do with the attack on Israel. The funds have not been dispersed to Iran yet, and Qatar's central bank in Doha currently oversees the funds. Another transaction under the radar is the deposit of $43 million in Iran's account. The US deposited $43 million in compensation for violating its obligations towards Tehran. The Iran-US Claims Tribunal issued the ruling. The case involves Iran's tangible properties of a non-military nature that had not been transferred to Tehran after the conclusion of the Algiers declarations. The declaration had entered into force in January 1981. And for more on this, joining me on the broadcast this minute is Charles Kupchan, Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and former Special Assistant to the President. Charles Kupchan was a Senior Director as well for European Affairs on the staff of the National Security Council in the Barack Obama administration. Good to have you with us. Thanks very much for sharing your perspectives. Let me begin by asking you for your assessment of what we are seeing unfolding here. These two transactions of $6 billion and $43 million that are under the scanner. This money trail leading to a lot of question marks. What do you make of what the US is saying at this point? The State Department is claiming that the money has, the prison transfer with Iran had nothing to do with the attack on Israel.
Well, the money that was dispersed to Qatar was in South Korean banks. South Korea had bought oil products from Iran legally and was concerned if it paid for those products, it would violate secondary sanctions. So the money was frozen. It's now sitting in Qatar. When it gets dispersed to Iran, it will be closely monitored by Qatari banks, and it will head to vendors for food and humanitarian assistance, not to the Iranian government. Yes, I think it's safe to say that Iran has is implicated in what's happening now because they're the ones that are providing arms, providing money to Hamas. But I think especially because that $6 billion has not yet been dispersed, it's impossible to suggest that Iran is somehow using this money to fuel the attack on Israel.
So you're saying that the $6 billion and the $43 million never reached Iran from the US?
Well, as you said in your report, the money is sitting in banks in Qatar. Those banks have not yet dispersed the money.
And when they do disperse it, claiming at this point, yes.
When they do disperse it, it will not be going to the Iranian government, which it could then use for nefarious purposes. It will go to specific vendors that are supplying food and medicine.
What do you have to say about the question marks that have been raised over the intelligence gaps, not just as far as Israel is concerned, but also vis-a-vis US intel? Was the US caught off guard completely about this attack by Hamas?
Well, it is a question that everybody's asking. because Israeli intelligence is reputed to be some of the best in the world, and clearly they missed what was coming. They were not prepared either for the missile attacks or the very substantial infiltration of Israel proper after the fence was punctured in several places. And then it took quite a long time for Israel to raise reserves and get those reserves into the south, where the militants had taken over dozens of towns. We don't know yet how this intelligence failure happened. I think it's in part that the West Bank loomed larger. The Israeli intelligence was focused on Lebanon and Hezbollah, which has thousands of missiles pointed at Israel. I think there was a sense that repeated Israeli strikes against Gaza were deterring Hamas from upsetting the status quo. Clearly, those assumptions were wrong. We're going to have to wait and see after an inquiry how Israeli intelligence missed the signs. And I'm guessing part of the problem here is they did not have as good human intelligence as they should have. They had not penetrated Hamas in a way that would have allowed them to see what was gathering.
All right, we're leaving it there for the moment. Thanks very much, Charles, for joining us on